Has the Book of Mormon changed? And if it has, does that matter? Welcome to Candlewick Library. I'm Cheryl. Today I'm going to talk about a project I've been working on for the last year and a half. A few years ago, when I first started questioning the LDS Church, there were things that were repeatedly brought up by multiple people. And since I was talking about the Bible a lot and asking questions about the Book of Mormon and about the church in general, the thing that I would hear the most was usually that the Bible has been altered and changed so many times that we can't fully trust the Bible, but that the Book of Mormon had never changed. This was sincere people. They really believed the Book of Mormon had never been changed. On the flip side, I would hear critics saying that there were thousands of changes in the Book of Mormon since the original. Then I would hear church apologists say, yes, they're right, there's changes in the Book of Mormon, but they're all punctuation and spelling and grammar updates, things that wouldn't matter. Based on hearing the everyday member saying there were no changes, the critic saying that there were thousands of changes and that it mattered, and then the apologist saying, yes, there's some changes just to update it to our time, but nothing had changed in the Book of Mormon or with the theology of the Book of Mormon, I just assumed that that was the truth, that the changes were probably there, and it was probably just updated grammar, spelling, and punctuation, and that those three things would not matter. But I am definitely the kind of person that likes to find out things on my own. I wanted to know for sure which one of those statements was the true statement. I didn't want to just take a critic's word for it, and I didn't want to take the apologist's word for it. So I thought the easiest way to do that would be to find out for myself. And then if somebody used that argument against me, then I would be able to tell them the truth, whether there were changes or not, what kind of changes there were, and I would know for a fact that it was accurate because I had done it with my own eyes, with my own copies of these books. I could show it. I could show anyone who wants to see what the truth is. So one of the first things that I realized is that as I learned more about the Bible, I realized how I think that most LDS members, and I could just be speaking about myself here, but based on what I've seen, I believe that most of us, when we are LDS, we don't fully understand what all of the different translations of the Bible are. That it's not just the Bible being altered and things being taken out and put in and changing what the original Bible was supposed to be. That when somebody makes a translation, they are translating from the original Greek and Hebrew that it was written in. And this is something that everyone can have access to. This is not something hidden or secret. And so they are translating it to fit their time period and their place. It would basically be the same as someone taking a Book of Mormon and translating it into any of the different languages for a different country. They are going to be taking the original source and translating it to fit the people that are reading it. If you went somewhere and someone had a Book of Mormon in Norwegian, you wouldn't say, oh, they've changed the Book of Mormon. It would be a translation. That was something that I quickly learned, that there are different kinds of translations of the Bible, and there are some where people have altered the word. I would stay away from those ones. It doesn't take very long to learn about all the different translations of the Bible and what they mean, and that there are some that are changing it to fit an agenda of some kind. There are some that are making it simplified, maybe for children to read. But most of the Bibles, they are translating from the original language to whatever language or time they are translating into. Hopefully that makes sense. I grew up reading the King James Version, and I still read that for the most part. I like the King James Version and the ESV the best. I have read them side by side, so I know that when a word is different in the ESV from the King James, it's not because it's changing the whole entire thought of the passage. It is another word that means the same thing, but maybe more detailed. And so that was very helpful to me as well to read those side by side. There are thought for thought Bibles, there are word for word Bibles, and then there's the ones that maybe do alter it a little bit more. Again, not hard to find, and if you buy one, you know exactly what you're getting and what the translation is. But when you look at the Book of Mormon, the reason that it's different is because that according to Joseph Smith, he had the plates that had the etchings in them, and he is translating directly from these plates. That translation would be directly from the plates into his time period and the language spoken at his time period. And with that being in the 1800s, it really wouldn't need to be updated that much for 2024. I mean, that's more recent than the King James Version of the Bible. And the main point that stuck out to me when I was thinking about all of that is that they don't tell you it's changed. If you picked up a Book of Mormon and it said updated for spelling and grammar, then you'd say, okay, it's updated grammar and spelling. But it doesn't ever tell you that. And I guess if somebody looked at the year it was printed and they wanted to study all of that. And they said, okay, in this year they did some updates, in this year they did some updates, in this year they did some updates. Then maybe you would know, but it's not common knowledge. Here I was with the Book of Mormon journal edition that I bought, I believe in 2019 or 2020. And as far as I knew, this was exactly the same word for word as it was when Joseph Smith would have originally translated it from the plates. Taking that all into consideration, I decided to start this project to know for myself whether it had changed at all. This wasn't because I was trying to prove or disprove the Book of Mormon. It had nothing to do with the validity of the book itself. This was just about wanting to know the truth of this one argument that had been used against me personally. So I purchased this book, Joseph Smith Begins His Work, Volume 1, Book of Mormon 1830, First Edition, reproduced from uncut sheets. This was put together by Wilford C. Wood. He also has a Volume 2, which I do also own, that is the Book of Commandments, which were then later renamed Doctrine and Covenants. So I decided that I would use that and then my Book of Mormon journal edition, and I would read them side by side to see what the differences were. I didn't start this project right away. Right when I got the books, I put them on my little cart to be read, and they sat there for a while I was working on other things, and then I began the project. I did the project for a few months. I got a little bit burnt out, put them aside again. A few months later, took them out again, did it for a little while, got burnt out again, put it aside, and then a few months ago, I realized that I was not going to achieve my goal of finishing it by the end of 2024 if I didn't get busy. So I decided I didn't want to be doing it in December, so I set the end date of the project to November 30th. And then I gave myself a week's wiggle room so that if there were days I couldn't do it or didn't want to do as many chapters, that I would still be able to finish by the end of November. And I made a little spread in my reading journal with all the little squares for every chapter I had left, and I read 2 to 3 chapters every day. A few days I was able to read more, a few days I read less, a few days I didn't read at all, and I still finished a week early. What I would do is every day I would sit down with both copies of the Book of Mormon, and I had an index card with the original edition. And then I would just use my finger, and I had a little black pen, and I would move the index card down one sentence, one line at a time. And as I read the one line original, I would look over at the newer Book of Mormon and I would read the sentence again. And occasionally there would be a really big change. And so I would go back and read the whole entire paragraph again to make sure I hadn't missed something or accidentally skipped a line, and write in any changes in my newer edition. At first, I hardly ever marked punctuation. I did it very sparingly just because I knew that that is the one thing that really doesn't matter. And I'll get to that again in a minute. But eventually I decided that I wanted to be able to get a full picture when I looked in the Book of Mormon to know how many changes there were, even if they were ones that weren't as important. And so I started doing all of the punctuation as much as possible. I know that I missed some words and some punctuation that are changed, but I tried my best to do all of it. I wish that while I was doing it, I had filmed a flip through of the pages each day. That would have been a lot easier because I had thoughts most days after my reading that were about what I had just read, but I didn't take the time to do that, unfortunately. So I didn't do the flip through until I finished. I'm going to show the flip through in a few minutes, and you will be able to see all the changes with your own eyes. And I do talk about some of the things that stood out to me as the most important. But even after I finished filming it, I remembered that there were a few things that I forgot to mention. The flip through is not going to talk about everything that's important. I'm not going to have all of my thoughts there, but it is going to show everything, and there will be a lot of discussion while I'm doing it. I did not count the changes that I marked. That would have been one extra step that would have taken so much time that I just didn't feel like doing. But there are some people who have said that they counted, and they counted 3,913 changes that are not in punctuation. If you added punctuation, it's about 105,000. I just didn't care enough to count them, but that's probably a pretty good estimate that there's at least close to 4,000 changes that aren't punctuation. So the main argument I talked about that the apologists would use is that most of the changes are punctuation, spelling, and grammar. So I'm going to talk about those three things. First, I'm going to talk about the changes that are actually in the Book of Mormon, and then I'm going to address some of the arguments that might be brought up about what I'm saying. And then I will show you the flip through, and then I'm going to come back for my final thoughts. Number one, punctuation. I said that punctuation doesn't matter. So why do I say that? Because when Joseph Smith delivered the manuscript to the printer, it was without punctuation. The typesetter, John Gilbert, had to put in all of the punctuation. That has nothing to do with the translation process, and It has nothing to do with Joseph Smith himself. Another change that really doesn't matter is the chapters and the verses. In the original, I'll show this, there are no verses in this original. And the chapters are much longer. And so in the newer one, the chapters are broken up very differently. And of course, the original doesn't have any of the chapter headings. Doesn't matter that they broke it up into verses. Doesn't really matter that the chapters were broken up in different places. And the chapter headings are just summaries of what you're about to read. So those are not things that change the content. And then there's spelling. So to me, spelling was something that would not matter. I would not think that that mattered at all. It's just updated spelling. You see that in a lot of things. But I have to read some quotes from early church history that will kind of shed some light on the spelling and grammar part of this. The Mormon apostle John A. Widstow stated, "The Book of Mormon has been published in large editions. It would not be possible to change any part of it without being discovered." In 1961, Joseph Fielding Smith, who was the 10th president of the church, said, "During the past week or two, I have received a number of letters from different parts of the United States written by people, some of whom at least are a little concerned because they have been approached by enemies of the church and enemies of the Book of Mormon, who had made the statement that there have been 1 or 2 or more thousand changes in the Book of Mormon since the first edition was published. Well, of course, there is no truth in that statement." I'm going to pause for a minute because if you're watching this, you already know from what I've said that there are changes. He doesn't even separate it from the changes that wouldn't matter with changes that would. He just says there's no truth in the statement that there have been thousands of changes in the Book of Mormon since the first edition. And this is a man who was a prophet, a leader of the LDS Church, and we know that's a lie. This is why these kind of quotes are important. The fact that they're saying we wouldn't be able to change it without people knowing, that there is no truth to the statement. This is why the members would argue to me that there haven't been any. And according to Joseph Smith's testimony, when he and the witnesses went out to pray about it, he said, "We heard a voice from out of the bright light above us saying, 'These plates have been revealed by the power of God, and they have been translated by the power of God. The translation of them which you have seen is correct, and I command you to bear record of what you now see and hear.'" And he said that the Book of Mormon was the most correct book on earth. All of these quotes show us that they're making you think that it has never changed and that it was a perfect translation from the beginning. So this leads into a conversation about the translation itself. I've made entire videos about the translation that you can go back and watch if you want all of the details about it. But when I was growing up, all of the artwork and everything that I read, heard, and saw depicted a very traditional kind of translation. That Joseph Smith was at a table, he's got the plates, he's looking at them, he's translating them. And now the church is being more open because they had to, because it came out about the fact that it was a rock. They don't often talk about the fact that it was a rock that he used in his treasure hunting days. It was a rock in a hat, and he would put his head in a hat, and then the words would appear on the rock. I've started to see some artwork popping up about this. They're starting to, like I said, be more open about it. But in the early church, they were open about it. It was known then. So it has been something that was actively changed, that they moved away from the correct narrative about the translation, before my lifetime. And now they're starting to get back to that original narrative. And that leads to the next few quotes I'm going to read. Oliver B. Huntington recorded in his journal that in 1881, Joseph F. Smith, the 6th president of the church, taught that the Lord gave Joseph Smith the exact English wording and spelling that he used in the Book of Mormon. He said this, "Saturday, February 25th, 1881, I went to Provo to a quarterly state conference, heard Joseph F. Smith describe the manner of translating the Book of Mormon by Joseph Smith the prophet and seer, which was as follows, as near as I can recollect the substance of his description. Joseph did not render the writing on the gold plates into the English language in his own style of language, as many people believe, but every word and every letter was given to him by the gift and power of God. So it is the work of God and not of Joseph Smith, and it was done in this way. The Lord caused each word, spelled as it is in the book, to appear on the stones in short sentences or words. And when Joseph had uttered the sentence or word before him, and the scribe had written it properly, that sentence would disappear and another appear. And if there was a word wrongly written, or even a letter incorrect, the writing on the stones would remain there." Martin Harris, one of the 3 witnesses, said that Joseph Smith received the translation directly from God and that it was a perfect translation. And David Whitmer, who was also one of the witnesses, described the translation process. "I will now give you a description of the manner in which the Book of Mormon was translated. Joseph Smith would put the seer stone into a hat, drawing it closely around his face to exclude the light, and in the darkness the spiritual light would shine. A piece of something resembling parchment would appear, and on that appeared the writing. One character at a time would appear, and under it was the interpretation in English. Based on those quotes, the spelling does matter. To me personally, I don't think it does. But the early church members that were important and that were quoting prophets and witnesses said that even the spelling of every word was from God. So spelling changes do kind of matter. They don't change the content though. So I would say that they only matter because of those quotes. And I want to move on to grammar. Grammar, again, was one of those things that when I started this project, I would have said the grammar does not matter. But very quickly, I realized that it did. Because when you are reading the Book of Mormon, it reads very much like the King James Bible. And while I would argue about how interesting and well written it is, I used to think it was more so than I do now. You're not taken out of the book by the bad grammar. So when you start reading it the way it was originally written, and you read things like this, in Alma 48, originally one of the sentences would say, the devil would never have no power. In Alma 62, and it came to pass after they had took them, they caused them. You start to see words like that over and over again. In Ether 10, and it came to pass they'd done all these things. That was one that I saw a lot. They'd done all these things. There were multiple times where it would say they went a wandering, they went a walking. A would just randomly be added to the beginnings of a word. There were some sentences where it would say, it would have multiple grammar mistakes in one sentence. And so it sounded like the stereotypical hillbilly would have written it. And one of the most interesting things to me is that it's become quite normal to try to portray Joseph Smith as this uneducated farm boy who can hardly string words together, because then it makes it very miraculous that this young man who couldn't speak eloquently could write this book. When you are reading it in the original wording, it is definitely obvious that he could have, and that it reads the way he spoke. But I also want to push back on the uneducated farm boy stereotype. He may not have been educated in schooling, but he was not dumb. When you read speeches that he gave, he actually could be quite eloquent sometimes. When I read things that Joseph Smith wrote that were not meant to be translations or revelation, but were just letters he wrote to people or speeches that he gave himself, he basically speaks King James Version with a little 1800s slang thrown in. And that is exactly what the Book of Mormon reads like when you read the original. So that is why the grammar matters. And even if you didn't care about any of those changes, because of the way that we know that it was translated from the witnesses, there actually should not be a single change in the Book of Mormon. Because if it was delivered exactly in God's language, not Joseph Smith's language, the way God wanted it delivered, the way it was originally written, etched on these plates, then there should be no changes. Besides maybe the punctuation and the verse and chapter changes, especially Jesus's words. When Jesus visits in the Book of Mormon and he is speaking, his words to them should not be altered at all, but they were. There are multiple changes in the sermons that he gave during that time. If this was given to Joseph Smith to translate this in the way that he did with the rock and the hat, and the new words would not appear until they had it down exactly correctly, nothing should have changed. And there's no way that Jesus's words would have been changed. But there are other kinds of changes as well. The spelling, the punctuation, the grammar, those are not the only changes in this book. There were also names that were changed. There was a city name that was changed. There were words that were altered that would then change the entire meaning of a sentence. There were full sentences taken out. There were full sentences put in. There were multiple phrases taken out or put in. The LDS apologist Brian Hells said this: not a single full sentence of his original dictation has been edited since the word stream was spoken, written, and immediately delivered to the printer. When I heard that, I was actually halfway through this project when I heard him say that. And I had to stop and just look at him for a minute and realize this man is somebody who LDS people will go to for the truth, because they believe that he knows more than them because of his expertise and his line of work, what he does. He is being dishonest. The way he worded that makes it sound like there's been no changes, but then he's careful about saying a full sentence. Because then if somebody says, oh, this word has changed, they'll be like, yeah, but there's no full sentence changed. I would push back on that because of the fact that there were full sentences put in that weren't there originally. I was trying to keep note after I heard that of whether there were any full sentences taken out. Most of the time it would be a very long run-on sentence and part of it would be taken out. But it would be maybe 2 or 3 sentences worth of words. I would say that you cannot say that not a full sentence has been changed. But even if you could, what does it mean to change a full sentence? Does that mean every word has to change in a sentence? If I said, I drove to the farm, or I walked to the farm, that's a completely different thing. If I said, I bought a car, or I bought a dog, the meaning is completely different. And only one word is changed in both of those examples. So it's a very dishonest statement that he made. During the flip through, you'll see exactly how many changes there were and some of the really important ones. Like I said, I have a lot of thoughts that I'm going to give at the end of the video. But first, before I do the flip through, I want to address some of the arguments that I will probably get about this subject. One is, how do I know that this is even accurate or authentic? I'm sure there are a lot of people that would just assume that this is not an accurate 1830 edition, and so it doesn't matter if there's things that are changed between here and the other Book of Mormon I had. I didn't know who Wilford C. Wood was before I got this, and so there are many people that might not know who he is. So I'm going to read a little bit about him. He was born on May 22nd, 1893, the son of George C. Wood and Adelaide Ridges Wood. He was raised in a large family on a very productive hillside farm located just north of Salt Lake in Woods Cross, which was named after his grandfather, Daniel Wood, one of the earliest settlers in Davis County, Utah. As a small child, Wilford developed a keen, alert mind, perhaps encouraged by his mother, one of Davis County's first school teachers. He attended public school in a Little Red schoolhouse and later went to LDS High School. Wilford was called on a mission to the northern states and left in February 1915. While he was on his mission, he gained a great love for the prophet Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. It became his desire to visit all the places where the prophet had been and to do everything he could to preserve those historic properties. So he served a mission for nearly 4 years, and they called him Book of Mormon Wood because he passed out more copies of the Book of Mormon than any of the other missionaries. After returning home from his mission, he was married, and then he went to New York City to a fur cutting and design school, and then opened a business doing that back here in Utah. The fur market was in New York City, though, so that gave him a lot of opportunity to travel. And he visited the historical sites on these trips and discovered that the church didn't own many of the sites that he thought were so important. From then on, he worked to find out who owned them and kept track of what was happening at these places so that he could purchase them whenever they became available. Among the sites that he purchased were Liberty Jail, Adam-on-Diamond, the Aaronic Priesthood property in Harmony, Pennsylvania, the Whitney Store in Kirtland, the Johnson Home in Hiram, Ohio, the Times and Season Building, the John Taylor Home, the Snow property, and most of the Temple Block in Nauvoo, Illinois. If you're not familiar with Mormon history, those are all very important sites that most Mormons would know about. Each of these purchases were turned over to the church when they were ready for them at whatever price he had paid, even though at times it was years later. He was assigned by the church to take missionaries to Nauvoo, Liberty Jail, and Carthage Jail. He felt that high priests and their wives should be called as missionaries to these places, and when the first missionaries were called in June of 1951, and he no longer had charge of them, he was then given charge of them at Hiram, Ohio, until the time of his death, January 17th, 1968. He created a museum in the home where he was born. He had President David O. McKay come and dedicate it as Mother's Home of Learning. He had many of the artifacts he collected housed in the adjoining building that contained his fur business. After he passed away, the family created a foundation to preserve the things which he had worked so hard to secure. Many of the historic artifacts he acquired have been given to BYU and the Church Museum, but the Wood Museum is still the home of hundreds of church and pioneer memorabilia, where anyone may visit to see and learn about the past. This was obviously someone who was very respected in the church community, had friends in high places, and was very dedicated and devoted to the LDS Church. He is not going to put out something that is not going to be accurate. He also wrote a letter about his edition that was notarized, saying that it was all accurate and reproduced from the uncut sheets of the original Book of Mormon. Also, the Deseret Publishing Company had a letter notarized that he had done this. And this is signed by Thomas S. Monson, who was the last prophet of the LDS Church before the one that is prophet right now. You can definitely trust the Wilford Wood edition of the original Book of Mormon. The second argument would be that I am sure people are going to look at this, look at what I've done, and say, what a waste of time. Get a life. Nobody wants to feel that way, that people are going to just say, you know, you've left the church, can't leave it alone. Why would you spend so much time doing this when you could be doing something else? And yet, usually the people that would say these kind of things are also the people that will say to you when you say something about the church, they will assume that you are just believing things that critics are telling you, that you don't know what you're talking about, that you've been deceived. So you can't have it both ways. Do you want people to hear the things about the church and find out for themselves, or do you not want them to? And for me, I am someone who wants to learn for myself. It was very important to me to know the truth for myself, and it was a huge time commitment. It was a very big project. It definitely was tedious at times. Like I said, I had a couple of times when I stopped for a while. There were times when I considered giving it up and not doing it anymore because I was so tired of doing it. But I like to finish things that I say I'm going to, and this was a priority for me. I wanted to finish this whole project and be able to give the full picture. So yes, I did spend a lot of time doing this, a lot of effort that could have been spent doing other things, but to me, it was a worthy effort, and it was worthy of the time spent on it. The funny thing about that also is that since I started questioning the church, and then when I left the church, a lot of people say, just read the Book of Mormon. You know, you'll come back if you read the Book of Mormon. Just read the Book of Mormon. I've read the Book of Mormon twice now in the last year and a half. And while all of the members this year in 2024 have been reading the Book of Mormon, I have been reading it as well. That also is something that when people say, you know, you need to read the Book of Mormon again, I can say, yes, I have. Mainly the biggest, most important thing is that I had a question and I found the answer to it. Some of you watching may have wondered the same thing and wanted an answer to this question. And now you won't have to do this. You will be able to see my flip through and see for yourself with your own eyes what I have found. Now, some of you may want to still go and do it yourself to see if you get the same results. But I can guarantee you that what I show in the flip through, the marks that I made, are exactly the changes from the old one to the new one. And I've probably missed some, but it is a good representation. So when you're watching the flip through, I made all of the changes to the Book of Mormon with a black pen. So you will see all of those changes with the black pen. You will also see highlighting. The highlighting is when there are Bible verses in the Book of Mormon. With this, keep in mind, I will talk about this in the flip through, and I'm also going to talk about it probably in my final thoughts. I do not have every verse from the Bible that is in the Book of Mormon highlighted. And you'll hear a little bit about why that is in the flip through. And I'll talk about it, like I said, in my final thoughts, because I have a lot of thoughts about the footnotes of the Book of Mormon. I hope you enjoy this flip through. It is long, so you might want to watch it at a faster speed, and I will see you afterward. I'm going to go through and show all of the changes and things that I have marked during this study. First, this is the title page. The Book of Mormon, an account written by the hand of Mormon upon plates taken from the plates of Nephi. You can already see that even this title page has a lot of changes on it. Most of these changes are punctuation or capitalization, things like that. But there is something that will pop up over and over and over again in this book, which is it will say who, and originally it said which. And here it said the house of Israel, which is to shew. Show would always be spelled shew, but I think that's pretty normal for that time period. And house, what great things the Lord had done for their fathers, but it used to say how great things the Lord had done for their fathers. So little changes like that are all over the place. And here we have this sentence, and now if there are faults, they are the mistakes of men. That's what it says now. Originally it said, if there be fault, it be the mistake of men. So you can see what I was saying about the grammar and how when you're reading it now, it seems very well written, but originally the grammar wasn't as well done. And this, of course, is not something that would have been on the plates that he was translating. This is his introduction, but it shows how Joseph Smith spoke when he was writing. It also said by Joseph Smith, Jr., author and proprietor, and then had Palmyra printed by E.B. Grandin for the author in 1830. Now it doesn't have that part, and it says translated by Joseph Smith Jr. instead of Joseph Smith, author and proprietor. Here we have abbreviations and contents. This introduction is not in the original, and this just explains what the Book of Mormon is. Here we have the testimony of the 3 witnesses and also the testimony of the 8 witnesses. That is what it originally said. At first, I thought this was not in the original because it wasn't at the beginning. It actually was at the end. And so at the end, I came back to this spot, crossed out where I had written not in the original, and put at back of the original. And here we just have their, used to say his instead of their. That is something that pops up a lot as well, that it will use a plural pronoun now, and originally it was a singular. Also, I underline right here, which is one God, because that's another thing I noticed in the Book of Mormon originally, that the language was very Trinitarian. And yet the Mormon theology is a very non-Trinitarian theology. This is the testimony of these three witnesses: Oliver Cowdery, David Whitmer, and Martin Harris. And then this testimony is of these 8 witnesses. These are all related to either the Whitmer or the Smith family. And in this, now it says the translator of this work, and it also used to say the author and proprietor. And I find that interesting because now if you are reading the Book of Mormon in 2024 and you read the testimony of the 8 witnesses, you are seeing them having their names added to something that they did not actually say, since they agreed to author and proprietor, not translator. Now, I don't think that makes any difference necessarily, because they would have, I'm sure that they would have said translator as well. However, I think that that is interesting because it's not completely honest when they change wording of something that is a statement by witnesses. The other interesting thing to remember is David Whitmer. I talked about him. He is used by the church when they want to use him, and then thrown out when they don't like what he has to say. And he was one of the 3 witnesses. The next is the testimony of the prophet Joseph Smith. This also is not in the original. It is quite long. And this gives his account of what happened in his own words, of how he was visited by an angel and all that. And then a brief explanation about the Book of Mormon, also not in the original. What is missing is the preface written by Joseph Smith. And I made a note of that here because it's written in exactly the same language and style as the rest of the Book of Mormon, even though it is admittedly written by Joseph Smith. So, of course, that is in this book. To the reader, as many false reports have been circulated respecting the following work, and also many unlawful measures taken by evil designing persons to destroy me, and also the work, I would inform you that I translated by the gift and power of God, and caused to be written 116 pages, the which I took from the Book of Lehi, which was an account abridged from the plates of Lehi by the hand of Mormon, which said account some person or persons have stolen and kept from me, notwithstanding my utmost exertions to recover it again, and being commanded of the Lord that I should not translate the same over again, for Satan had put it into their hearts to tempt the Lord their God by altering the words, that they did read contrary from that which I translated and caused to be written. And if I should bring forth the same words again, or in other words, if I should translate the same over again, they would publish that which they had stolen, and Satan would stir up the hearts of this generation, that they might not receive this work. But behold, the Lord said unto me, I will not suffer that Satan shall accomplish his evil design in this thing. Therefore thou shalt translate from the plates of Nephi until ye come to that which ye have translated, which ye have retained. And behold, ye shall publish it as the record of Nephi, and thus I will confound those who have altered my words. I will not suffer that they shall destroy my work. Yea, I will shew unto them that my wisdom is greater than the cunning of the devil. Wherefore, to be obedient unto the commandments of God, I have, through his grace and mercy, accomplished that which he hath commanded me respecting this thing. I would also inform you that the plates of which hath been spoken were found in the township of Manchester, Ontario County, New York. The author. This is very important, I think, and I believe that that is why it was taken out. I'm sure you can find this in other church sources, but people that say, like I mentioned, that Joseph Smith could not have written the Book of Mormon don't understand him. They don't know him. All you have to do is read this thing that he wrote, and it is exactly the same wording as the Book of Mormon. It's exactly the same style. If I read that and I didn't know he wrote it, and it was placed in the middle of the Book of Mormon, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference. And then he also, again, calls himself the author, not the translator. Sorry if this is shaking. This is the first time I've used an overhead camera, and I can see that sometimes it's shaking. So I'm sorry. I'm going to try to be really good about that. So then start the first book of Nephi. This part right here is in the original with just small modifications. What won't be in the original are the verses, because it wasn't broken into verses, and the chapter headings. So each chapter heading I have crossed out. And then what I've done is I've added in where there's words missing. I try to add them in between the words or in the margins. So right here, and I know that the record which I make is true. It used to say I make is to be true. So I would add those words to show the things that are missing. I tried to highlight wherever there were Bible verses in the Book of Mormon. There are Bible verses in here that are from the New Testament, and this is a long time before the New Testament happened. And so right here it says, and to declare unto them concerning the things which he hath both seen and heard. This is a rearrangement of the words of the sentence in John 1:3. And if you go to verse 18, there are footnotes for 2nd Nephi, Doctrine and Covenants, and that's it. There's no reference to John. Now, maybe you're thinking there wouldn't be unless the words are written in exactly the same way. However, the way that their footnotes are written, usually if one word is the same, they will have a footnote. So that is interesting. But I did a few of these. There, steadfast and immovable, steadfast and unmovable from 1 Corinthians, being grieved because of the hardness of their hearts. That's Mark 3:5. I did those three before I realized it was going to be way too tedious to try to go back and highlight all of the Bible verses that are in this that were not put in the footnotes because there were just too many. And so for the rest of the book, you will only see highlighted the Bible verses that I found myself while reading. And I'm going to talk about that again in a minute. But here we have, again, that. The word that is left out quite often in this book. They have removed it a lot. Exceeding, most of the time in the original, it says exceeding, and now it will say exceedingly. Sometimes I just have notes here of things I wanted to remember that were not necessarily for this video. Here we have which left out, for he knowing that Jerusalem must be destroyed, and now it says he knew. Here in 1 Nephi 4, we get that story of Nephi killing Laban to get the brass plates, as they called it. And he was drunk. There was absolutely no reason to actually cut off his head to kill him. There are so many things wrong with this story that I don't necessarily need to go into them, but that's one of them. If he's drunk, why kill him? Wouldn't his clothes have been covered in blood if he had just cut off his head? There's so many problems. But here we also have more Bible verses and some more Bible verses. You'll also notice how the chapters were longer in the original. So right here we have chapter 6, but originally chapter 2 would just be starting. We also have a lot more who's that used to be which. And again, that goes back to what I was talking about the grammar, that the grammar has been updated. So we have more Bible verses. Meat used to be spelled M-E-T-E. Here I also made a note because it says that God delivered them out of the hands of Laban. And so I said how he was drunk. They weren't in his hands because he was never in danger in this moment because Laban was drunk. He cut off his head. It's just not quite the way it was said. Okay, then we get to what is now chapter 8. And the reason it looks like all of this here is because this is the account of Lehi's vision of the tree of life. And Joseph Smith's own mother wrote about how his father had a dream. And this dream is very, very similar to Lehi's vision. And this is the text of his dream that Joseph Smith's mother wrote. And it just goes to show how one of the things you will see going through the Book of Mormon is how much of it not only is word for word from the Bible, how much of it is stories from the Bible or from history that have been repurposed, but also things in his own life that have been put into the Book of Mormon. We also see parts that are taken out right here. But behold, Laman and Lemuel, I fear exceedingly because of you. For behold, methought I saw in my dream a dark and dreary wilderness. In my dream wasn't there originally. And right here, and after I had traveled for the space of many hours, originally it said, and after I had followed him. And straight was spelled differently. Here's more of that dream of his father's. My source for that, I got it from No Man Knows My History by Fawn Brody, but also from Fair Mormon, which is an LDS apologist. So I went to both the non-church and church source to make sure that the wording was exactly the same. Here they left out the word how before that, how that after they were destroyed, yea, even that great city Jerusalem, and that many were carried away captive into Babylon, that according to their own due time of the Lord, they should return again. That's how it originally would have read. And now it's the after they should be destroyed, even that great city Jerusalem, and many be carried away. And so it was this verse in chapter 10, verse 3, now this verse is talking about something that's going to happen. The way it originally was written was that it had already happened, and also just random words thrown in there. And again, more whoms that used to be witches, who's that used to be witches. My father said, and it used to say, saith that. I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but you can see how often these words are changed. Right here, this is another example of Trinitarian language. This is in 1 Nephi 11. This is verse 32. Well, originally it wouldn't have been 11, but now it says, and I looked and beheld the Lamb of God, that he was taken by the people, yea, the Son of the everlasting God was judged of the world. Originally, it said, and I looked and beheld the Lamb of God, that he was taken by the people, yea, the everlasting God. So they added son of the, and that will happen again. In fact, it's right here where it happens again. And the angel said unto me, behold, the Lamb of God, yea, even the Son of the eternal Father. And originally it said the eternal Father. And right here, and he said unto me, behold, the virgin whom thou seest is the mother of the Son of God. Originally it said the mother of God. So he did use Trinitarian language in the Book of Mormon, and they have changed it to make it sound more like how they teach God now. Right here, it says now the eternal God and the Messiah. Who is the Lamb of God? You say the eternal God and Jesus Christ, which is the Lamb of God. So I don't know why they changed Jesus Christ to Messiah there, but they did. And then right here, I just made a note because he said that he saw these wars and rumors of wars. And I just was wondering, how do you see a rumor of war? Maybe he saw people gossiping. Right here, and it came to pass that I saw among the nations of the Gentiles the formation of a great church. And the angel said unto me, behold, the formation of a church. Originally, it said foundation. So it would have been the nations of the Gentiles, the foundation of a great church. And the angel said unto me, behold, the foundation of a church. Two different things. Again, more words. Behold, after this, foundation and formation interchanged again. There's so many words that are taken out or added. Down here, it contained the fullness of the gospel of the Lord. It used to say it contained the plainness of the gospel of the Lord. There's a difference between plainness and fullness as well. Over here, we have, neither will the Lord God suffer that the Gentiles shall forever remain in that state of awful woundedness, which thou beholdest that they are in. Now it says, shall forever remain in that awful state of blindness. So again, they're changing words here and there. This whole phrase taken out, that shall publish, you can see here where I've crossed out words right here, taking away of their stumbling blocks, if it so be that they harden not their hearts. And now it just says, and harden not their hearts. So you quite often, it really is often that words are completely changed, left out, added in. And you can see on every page all of my spots. And again, this is when I still have not started doing punctuation every single time yet. This really resembles Noah and how he was getting prepared to build a ship. And that will happen again later in the book. There will be another people group that have to build a ship as well. Neither time do they have as many details as Noah did. This one has a little bit more, but in this one, he is having to build tools. And he talks about how he had to make the ore, and he had to make fire. I did smite two stones together that I might make fire. Verse 12, for the Lord had not hitherto suffered that we should make much fire as we journeyed in the wilderness. For he saith, I will make the food become sweet that ye cook it not. And before that happened, I was questioning this part. Wait a second, how are they having fire to make tools? Because they had to eat raw food, raw meat in the wilderness because they couldn't have fire. And so when it said this, all of a sudden I wrote, this feels like an oops, I forgot I made them eat raw meat. And now I'm showing that he knows how to make fire. And so it was kind of like, well, now I'm making fire. And so that was something, some people that might not bother you, but it did stick out to me. Again, right here, he did straighten them. There's different words like that are different. All right here, it says, even they were near to be cast with sorrow into a watery grave. Originally, with sorrow was not there, so that's added. And then we have the list given of different animals that they have here. And so I had to make a note here about the anachronisms of this. It's historically out of place because the animals that are mentioned are ones that weren't brought to the Americas until post Columbus, like the goats and oxen, cows, horses, and donkeys. And yet the animals that would have already been there, bears, jaguars, bald eagles, llamas, bison, alligators, cougars, things like anacondas, things like that are not mentioned. And so the animals that we should hear about, we don't hear about. And the animals we shouldn't, we do. For me, an anachronism like that, an animal, is not necessarily in and of itself a reason to disbelieve in the Book of Mormon. I think it's one thing added to a bunch of things. I can personally understand the argument of maybe they have it dated wrong or something like that. Like, I'm not going to argue that because I have not researched that enough. I can't say whether I believe or don't believe about certain animals not being here or being here because I just have not researched that myself enough. But that is why it is not a breaking point for me, because I haven't researched it. But I do know that the apologists nowadays, they're not saying that argument. They are saying, well, maybe it was a taper. And so they are even agreeing with the argument that they weren't there until after Columbus. and then using a ridiculous excuse for it. The anachronism might not be enough for me to say, well, this means it's not true. However, even the LDS apologists use it and make excuses for it that actually don't make sense. Here it says, engraven upon those first plates. First originally was not there. Right here, saith the prophet is left out. And okay, you can see that this page has a lot of things to say. I'm going to start with verse 20. For behold, I have workings in the spirit which doth weary me, even that all my joints are weak. For those who, which originally said they which, are at Jerusalem, for had not the Lord been merciful to shew unto me concerning them, even as had the prophets of old, I should have perished also. Originally, that was not there. So originally, it would have just said merciful to them to show unto me concerning them, even as prophets of old, and then would have gone directly to, for he surely did show unto the prophets of old things concerning them. And so we see more words added. And then right here is chapter 6 starting. So that's why I have that there. And wherefore left out. I mean, you can just see how many words are changed here. Right here where it says, or out of the waters of baptism, that is added to this section, which is all Isaiah. So right here in this heading, you can see compare Isaiah 48. Now, this shows my ignorance of the Bible when I was a fully active Mormon, that I didn't know my Bible well enough to know that this was word for word, and I never went to check that. Maybe other people do, but I did not. And so when it said compare Isaiah 48, I just assumed that a lot of it was similar to Isaiah 48, that it had some of the same things in it, but I didn't know that that meant that this was Isaiah 48 written over again. And so if you look down here for what we have nowadays as chapter 20, verse 1-8 says Isaiah 48:1, and then in parentheses 1 through 22. And then throughout, you'll see different Isaiah verses. But I really wanted to try to follow those as much as possible. And so here I highlighted everything that was exactly from the Bible. And what's funny is that even though the punctuation has been changed, which is something that I don't think matters, it was the same as the Bible verses. But here where it says, and they come forth out of the waters of Judah, for out of the waters of baptism, that was added by Joseph Smith. Also, I didn't do this the whole time throughout the book, through this whole study, but what I did do at the beginning is that sometimes I have words that are circled. The reason I have those words circled is because this highlighted Isaiah 48. This is the King James Version. And in the King James Version, there are words that the translators added to make it make more sense in 1600 English, in the English of their time. And so those words, if this was inspired directly from God and not from the translators of the King James time period, it should not have the words that they added, but it does. And you can see how many of them it has. So this goes on to being Isaiah 49. And now it came to pass that after I, Nephi, had read these things, after that I is how it usually was. So those words were left out. And then we get to the second book of Nephi. Father Lehi also spake many things unto them, and rehearsed unto them how great things the Lord had done, and rehearsed unto them is added. That did not used to be there. The idea of the whole Book of Mormon is that the Native Americans were these chosen Israelites. Before Jerusalem was destroyed, they were warned to leave. They were brought to this choice land, which, depending on who you're talking to, is either in the United States of America, in Central America, or in South America. It really depends. According to that which is in God, which he could not restrain. Originally, it said constrain. Here, grace and truth from John 1:17. Here it's talking about Adam and Eve. It says, an angel of God, according to that which is written, had fallen from heaven, wherefore he became a devil. So they're admitting here that Satan was considered a fallen angel, which is not necessarily how he's spoken about in LDS theology, except that I do think that they believe that humans and angels are the same thing. And so I don't know that they would necessarily think that that was something that needed to change, but then they also get Eden wrong. Then we're just going. That's just more and more things that are changed. You can see all the highlights that are Bible verses. We have words that are missing. And it came to pass that people joke all the time about how often the Book of Mormon uses the phrase, and it came to pass. But if it was in as many times as it was at the beginning, it would be even more. That it was taken out quite a bit. So you can see here all of the changes written in. Right here, he's talking about this temple that they built. I, Nephi, did build a temple, and it says it could not. I did construct it after the manner of the temple of Solomon, save it were not built of so many precious things, for they were not to be found upon the land, wherefore it could not be built like unto Solomon's temple. So is it or is it not like Solomon's temple? Nothing like Solomon's temple has been found anywhere over here, but it's basically saying it's built like that. It just doesn't have all of the fancy things. Okay, we've got more verses from the Bible here. And again, you can see words that are circled that shouldn't be there. Right here, I've written that this is all so close to Isaiah, but it's rearranged. So it's almost like somebody is quoting it and doesn't remember exactly the way it was written. They don't have it memorized word for word. So they're saying it differently, or they're looking at something and they're trying to rewrite it in their own words. That is what that sounds like. So here, again, all of this is Isaiah 50 through 52. Lots of words are rearranged. I'm only in 2nd Nephi. I am barely into this book, and you're already seeing how many things have changed. Some of these you might not think are that big of a deal. This is reworded from Isaiah 55. Oh, this was a part that I found interesting. Wherefore, as I said unto you, it must needs be expedient that Christ, for in the last night the angel spake unto me that this should be his name, should come among the Jews. And that little aside in the parentheses made me feel like that was an afterthought, that as he said Christ and then was like, oh shoot, would they have known his name already was going to be that? I don't know. It just seems kind of like one of those things that I found throughout the whole Book of Mormon, where it feels like Joseph Smith was putting in something to explain something he said. We have Bible language throughout. We've got more Bible chapters. Right here, the Bible verse ends, and he has added, shall smite thee. And I think that's so interesting how often that is going to happen as well, where it's Bible verse, and then he adds a threat that wasn't there originally. So again, these are all Bible verses that are here. This is an interesting part. Okay, so in verse 16 right here, and upon all the ships of the seas, and upon all the ships of Tarshish, and upon all of the pleasant pictures. And they have a note down here in the footnotes that says the Greek Septuagint has ships of the sea, the Hebrew has ships of Tarshish, but the Book of Mormon has both, showing that the brass plates had lost neither phrase. And so I had marked that because to me that is something that you're going to cling on to as an active member of, oh, see, they haven't lost the phrase yet. And yet Joseph Smith had access to those. So there's nothing remarkable if Joseph Smith had access to it. And I think people forget that Joseph Smith had access to the King James Bible. He had access to the Apocrypha. He had a Bible with those things in it. And so the things that people bring up a lot of times as these remarkable things, all you have to do is, instead of reading what they say and going, oh, wow, you have to stop for a second and say, okay, but is that remarkable? Just a little critical thinking, that's all. Again, Bible verses, Isaiah 4, Isaiah 5, Isaiah 6, Isaiah 7, Isaiah 8. And here, this part is a little bit interesting. Right here in verse 4, for behold, the child shall not have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, before the riches of Damascus, and the spoil of Samaria shall be taken away before the king of Assyria. The words here that are added that are not in the King James Version are behold, not, and before. So if you read it without those, for the child shall have knowledge to cry, my father and my mother, the riches of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria. So the words that are missing change what it's saying. We also have right here, this is still Isaiah 9. However, right here we have, did more previously afflict by the way of the Red Sea beyond Jordan and Galilee of the nations. Red Sea is not from the King James Version. When Jesus quoted Isaiah in Matthew 4:15, he did not say Red Sea. It's not found in any source documents and is 250 miles away from where they are talking about right here. So that is a very big mistake that Joseph Smith added. All right, we've got more 1611 King James Version language and even more. All the way to there. So now we are in what is now 2nd Nephi chapter 25. where we're finally done with those Isaiah chapters. And we go back to, again, having some punctuation, some words that are or are not capitalized, but also a lot of words changed in their grammar. And here it talks about the familiar spirit. However, in Book of Mormon language, it talks about familiar spirit as a good thing. And in the Bible, it was always a bad thing. It's very interesting. He also talks about priestcrafts here, but then lists things that aren't priestcrafts. It says compare Isaiah 29. So I expected it to be exactly like Isaiah 29, the way the other chapters were, but it is very loosely. It is all over the place, changing the meaning of the verses, leaving words out. And so by the time you're done with it, it is completely different than Isaiah 29 in thought. And right here, Joseph Smith does something he does in the Bible translation that he did, but then also a couple of times in the Book of Mormon, which is he talks about himself. Wherefore, at that day, when the book shall be delivered unto the man of whom I have spoken, the book shall be hid from the eyes of the world, that the eyes of none shall behold it, save it be that 3 witnesses shall behold it, by the power of God, beside him to whom the book shall be delivered, and they shall testify to the truth of the book and all things therein. He's prophesying about himself in his own book. And then here's more Bible verses. Again, very loosely, you can see how it's split up between his own thoughts and the Bible verses. Here, travels became travails. This one is an important one. In verse 6 of 2 Nephi 30, it says, and then they shall rejoice, for they shall know that it is a blessing unto them from the hands of God, and their scales of darkness shall begin to fall from their eyes, and many generations shall not pass away among them, save they shall be a pure and delightsome people. But originally it said white. And there are other places where it does still say white in the Book of Mormon, but they changed it there. And so people will point to that when they say it wasn't the skin of darkness on the Native Americans was not the curse that it talks about, but it was. And originally it did say there'll be a white and delightsome people. One thing I noticed at this point, and this is going to become something that is throughout the whole book as well, is that this book is so redundant. He repeats things over and over and over again. And so I wrote here, why would you be so redundant if you're etching on plates? If you stop and think about how hard it would be to etch into a plate, if it was written on scrolls, that would make sense. I'm redundant. A lot of people are redundant. But if you are etching into metal, you are only going to write the least amount possible. You're going to try to say the most by saying the least. You wouldn't keep telling the same exact stories or the same sentences over and over again. At least I don't think you would. I think that would be extremely difficult. And then here we have more about the skins. Their skins will be whiter than yours. Darkness of their skins. So those ones were left in. Those ones have not been changed, but it still goes to show that they're talking about skin, not something that they're wearing or something like that. Right here, he even says, because of the difficulty of engraving our words upon plates. And so that's exactly what I was talking about. So why would they write so many things over and over again if it was so difficult? Again, you see lots of where it says said now, and it used to say saith. You also find a lot of Z names. There are certain letters that Joseph Smith really liked, and a lot of the people's names will start with those letters, and Z is one of them. Wherefore the people of Nephi did fortify against them with their arms. And of course, that means arms as in weapons. But originally it said their armies. And I'm not sure why they would change armies to arms. We get to the book of Enos, and here we have, and the words of my father taken out. So you can see some words are changed, but also whole passages are taken out. The book of Jerem, he talks about the different kinds of metal that they worked with, and there's no evidence at all in archaeology of them having that kind of technology at this time. The book of Omni, right here, it says, and Mosiah nor the people of Mosiah could understand them. And originally it said could not understand them. And then we get to the book of Mosiah. For he having been taught in the language of the Egyptians, therefore he could read these engravings and teach them to his children, and thereby they could teach them to their children. And it says later on in the Book of Mormon that he called this language Reformed Egyptian, which is not a language. I'm not sure why it just says Egyptian there. This part gives the story of King Benjamin when he addressed his people. And the most interesting thing about this story is that in Joseph Smith's time, very near his home, there was a Methodist preacher that was very well known that came to do a big sermon in front of a bunch of people. They came with tents. They had a raised platform. It is very much like this story. And these people gathered to hear his last sermon. And his name was Benjamin as well. Benjamin Paddock. All right, so we have, again, words left out, words put in, Bible verses. This also talks about Jesus as being from all eternity to all eternity, but in LDS theology, he is a son of God literally, and so that wouldn't necessarily make sense. Some of the things I want to talk about, I wish I could talk about every single change, but that would take forever. So most of these I'm just going to skip right through, and you can just see on here with your own eyes the changes that have happened. And you can see that it's not always just punctuation. It is words that are left out and words that are changed. What I wrote here is they have a footnote for Isaiah 33:2, and that's not one of them here, but it has other places right around it. So that was interesting that they chose that one. Again, more and more Bible verses with the King James language still in it, more Trinitarian language. This tells the story of Lamanite daughters who are abducted by the priests of Noah. And so I made this note here because I've been talking about how many of the Bible stories find their way into the Book of Mormon, how many of things from Joseph's own life find their way into the Book of Mormon. This story is also very similar to the Sabine women in Plutarch. And if you've ever seen Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, you know when he talks about that. Right here, in Mosiah, it says, and now Limhi was again filled with joy on learning from the mouth of Ammon that King Mosiah had a gift from God. And this originally said Benjamin. And this is not the only time this happens. Again, more it came to passes that were left out. Lots of them. And more of them. Right here, wrecked was changed to racked. Wandering was changed to waiting. A lot of times the word a will be put in front of things like I went a wandering instead of I went wandering, or something like that would be changed. Now we're in the book of Alma. Here it talks about how the people were so great that they could not be numbered, which again is something that archaeology does not back up. Right here, he may know according to the flesh how to succor his people. And originally it said suffer. But this right here is one of the most important parts. This is verse 10 of Alma 7. What is Alma 7 now? Verse 10. And behold, he shall be born of Mary at Jerusalem. I don't know how I glazed over that my entire time as a Mormon. How did I not notice in the Book of Mormon they give the wrong city? More came to passes, more word changes. Another thing that comes up a lot is, I already mentioned this, of the pronouns changing from singular to plural. Right here, it used to say arrest. If ye will arrest them, it shall be to your own destruction. And now it is rest with a W. More it came to passes, also. Those are a lot of words that are left out. Right here, this whole phrase is left out, even as with the power and authority. Here it talks about he was fighting a bunch of guys and cut off their arms. 6 of them had fallen by the sling, but he slew none save it were their leader. With his sword did not used to be there. And he smote off as many of their arms as were lifted against him, and they were not a few. And this is, again, a thing that reminds me of the Bible. It reminds me of David and Goliath with his sling. Right here, and Ammon is left out. Came to pass, left out. You can see all these words. I'm trying to go fast because I really don't want this to be 2 hours. I doubt that there's very many people that want to look at every single page in detail on this video. So if you do, let me know and maybe I'll make a more in detailed one. Again, right here, there's wording that makes it sound like he said one thing and then corrected it really quickly. Like I said, sometimes I just add notes in here that are mostly for my own question that I don't need to talk about. Here he talks about the chief judge writing something that for people, and so I wrote, why did the chief judge write, and what did they write on? I've watched a lot of videos and read a lot of books where they talk about how the people we believe to be the first inhabitants of this land in South America and Central America, how they were not a literary people. Stories were told orally, and so it's strange how much writing and how literate the people are in the Book of Mormon. But behold, as a seed swelleth and sprouteth and beginneth to grow, it used to say, and then ye must needs say that the seed is good. For behold, it swelleth and sprouteth and beginneth to grow, and now behold. And so originally it would go down to here. Are you sure that this is a good seed? That is how it used to be. Now this whole part is added. Will not this strengthen your faith? Yea, it will strengthen your faith. For ye will say, I know that this is a good seed. For behold, it sprouteth and beginneth to grow. Why would they add that much to it? More words. Here's more Z names. Corrections here. Oh, this is another thing. I made a note for this. Another thing that you find in this, especially with the changes that have been made, but even after the changes have been made, there are so many fragmented sentences in the Book of Mormon. So many times it starts going one way and then it ends, and it never made the point it was going to make. And I don't know why I never noticed that either, because like I said, some of them are because of the changes, but some of them are still there. And it does that so often. And then this part I have to stop on again. Here he is talking about how these people would become wicked and be destroyed, and that the Lord would see that his people begin to work in darkness and have these secret murders and combinations and all this. So he would prepare unto his servant a stone which would shine forth in the darkness unto light. And it keeps calling them interpreters nowadays, because we talk about these stones that were supposedly buried with the Book of Mormon plates, and they refer to them often as the Urim and Thummim, and called them interpreters. Originally, they weren't even called interpreters. It called them directors. But there is another important point to this. Let me grab a paper I wrote it down on. The term Urim and Thummim was not known within the church until 1833, when W. W. Phelps speculated that the interpreters may have been the biblical Urim and Thummim. And then people began to use the term to refer to the seer stone. And Urim and Thummim actually refers to two things, while a stone is just one. And so I found that very interesting, that originally they didn't even call it that, but now people will say the Urim and Thummim that he translated with, he didn't even use those. And originally they were called directors, and it's only called that because somebody else had coined the phrase, maybe it's the Urim and Thummim from the Bible. And so then of course you want to use it that way so that you can have that connection to the Bible. Oh, right here, retain, that was left out, changes the meaning of the sentence a little bit. Right here, again, rested used to be arrested. Incomplete sentences again. It came to pass that Moroni and his army, that whole part is left out there. And Moroni left out. I don't think anyone watching this can dispute how many words are left out. And again, right here, he uses something where he explains why this is there. For thus were all the true believers of Christ, which belong to the church of God, called by those who did not belong to the church, because he used the word Christians. And so he had to explain why the word Christians would have been there. There was a double negative here. The devil would never have no power over the hearts of men. Originally, that was how it was written. And again, you can see words that are left out and words that were added. More redundancy. Here it says that they would not fall upon the Lamanites and destroy them because they were drunk. And I found that to be funny, since that is what Nephi did. And again, you can see plenty of places where there are whole phrases that were changed. Right here, for behold, Amoron had sent to their support a new supply of provisions. Originally, it said Ammon, so that's another case where it was the wrong name. And throughout here, the word retain is constantly changed to regaining. That happens throughout this whole storyline at the end of Alma. It also talked about how all of the cities had been put back in their possession, and yet here they were fighting to try to get more back. And this part where he is writing and saying, hey, we need help, this reminded me of George Washington's letter from Valley Forge. It is very similar. Singular to plural, more words that were left out. Here he goes explaining himself again. Behold, I do not mean the end of the book of Helaman, but I mean the end of the book of Nephi, because he probably, it makes it sound like he was ending something and then was like, wait, I'm going to add more, and so had to give an excuse for that. Right here, Gadianton, the robber, originally said the nobler. That's a completely different definition. This again is areas that are similar to Bible stories, if you read through it. And this part really stuck out to me because it's talking about these Gadianton robbers, that it's a secret club, it's a secret combination that murder and plunder. They're the bad guys, but they have tokens and signs, which are secret signs and secret words to gain entry into their covenants. And I found that very strange, since to be a Mormon, if you go in the temple, you have signs and tokens. That is what they call them, that you learn, that you have to do. And so this very much makes the Gadianton robbers sound more like what the modern Mormons are like. Not in what they're doing, but in what they have. And so if they're bad for having those things, I don't understand how that is something that is glazed over as well. And there were so many little plot holes in this area of the Book of Mormon. I got to this part of Helaman. This is Helaman 13. And here he says, they have set their hearts upon riches, and because they have set their hearts upon riches, I will hide up their treasures when they shall flee before their enemies. So it's like God is saying, set their heart on treasures, so I'm going to hide their treasures. However, originally it said, set their hearts upon riches and will hide up their treasures. So they were hiding their treasures. So it's one word changes the meaning completely. But also, when I was reading this part, I kept thinking about Joseph Smith and his treasure digging, and how he would go out and tell people where treasures were. And then when they wouldn't find treasure, he would say it was because they did something wrong, or they didn't properly appease the spirit guardian or something like that. And so the treasure became slippery and would sink into the ground further where they couldn't reach it. That is what this was reminding me of. And then I turned the page, and here it's talking about, they curses your riches that it becomes slippery. All things are become slippery. And he uses that exact language. So I put, yes, this is how he described treasure that went away when he was a treasure digger, slippery. So it was funny to me that I noticed that here, the same kind of idea. And then lo and behold, the next page, he's using the exact same words that he used as a treasure digger. At this point, I was very ready to be done with this project. It was really hard to keep going. Right here, and their curse was taken from them, and their skin became white like unto the Nephites. So the curse was skin. It proves it. It tells you in the Book of Mormon that it is what they meant. So the apologists today saying that that's not what they mean, they're wrong. I don't understand how anybody is not uncomfortable with the fact that we're saying that these people's skin became dark because they were cursed, and that when they were righteous, that their skin became white again. And again, lots of words missing. Words changed. Right here, now it says prophets of the Lord. It used to say prophets of the land. Although they were nearly, so that's a pretty big statement to have left out. And it came to pass, thereof, lots of thereofs. Right here is another place where the language is very much, sounds like it's from the Bible. It's not a word for word copy, but it sounds very much like it as you're reading it, because there's phrases here and there. It also changes from third person to first person. O ye people of the house of Israel, that whole part is taken out. Again, that may not be a full sentence, but it's very close to one. We have more Bible verses, more words changed. And then here this is 3rd Nephi, we've got quite a few bits of Bible here. However, it's some are missing and added. Like I said, like you have Matthew 5 almost memorized, or you're looking at it and trying to change it. And the interesting thing here is that, like I talked about, these people should not have been so literate. And in the Bible, a lot of the stories were passed down orally as well. And so, in the parts where it's taken from the Bible, when there's parts that are changed, what is interesting to me is that in the Bible, it says they heard, but in here, it's been changed to written. And so it seems like it takes what was right in the Bible of how the people learned their stories orally and is making everybody seem like they're literate because it makes sense. And so it changes the whole idea as well. I find that these parts of the Bible, when they're in the Bible, they make sense. Jesus is speaking to the Jewish people about synagogues, places that they were very familiar with, but it doesn't make sense in this different civilization that he would be talking to them exactly the same way and about the same things. He talks so much to these ancient Americans about synagogues, their synagogues over and over and again, and these things that are not found anywhere in the Americas, and there's no precedent for it. This part is an extremely interesting chapter. So this is 3rd Nephi 13, and it matches up with Matthew 6, and it is identical to the King James Version of the Bible, but it is not identical to Joseph Smith's translation of Matthew 6. So right here, I've written the Joseph Smith translation. So if you go and you look that up in the Joseph Smith translation and you compare it to the actual Bible verses there, you'll see how different this is. And why would Joseph Smith's translation of the Bible say that what Jesus said was completely different than what Jesus said in the Book of Mormon as well? So that is something that, to me, when I say that the anachronisms of animals and stuff, that those don't make as big of a difference to me, these are the things that make a big difference to me. Also, the other things I learned about Joseph Smith and his life and about the translation in general, but it's things like this where I realized that the Bible is word for word in here, but then Joseph Smith said, wait, those words aren't right, and corrected them. That is a huge deal to me. Again, more and more of the same. I think you've gotten the idea by now that the Book of Mormon definitely has changed, and it has changed a lot. Some of it insignificant, some of it not. Right here, and I will be their rearward. It used to be re-reward. I don't know what that was. Again, more Bible, more changes. Right here is where we get the belief that Mormons have that John the Beloved never died. It talks about these 3 Nephite men that will live forever, and it talks about John living forever. And so I didn't remember that that's where it was from until I was reading this time. And then we get into the 4th book of Nephi, and originally it didn't say 4th Nephi, it just said the book of Nephi, which is the son of Nephi instead of who. Here it says they did fill the cities is what it originally said, but now it says build the cities. Again, these are more things that were already said that are repeating themselves. It talks about churches that profess to know Christ, but they deny the more parts of his gospel, which I believe Mormonism does. And then it goes on. Here's the slippery treasure again. Right here, they talk about the city. Now it says the city of Angola, and it used to say Angela, spelled like angel with an AH at the end. So another name change, but that one of a city. Here is another prophecy of Joseph Smith himself. And I am the same which hid up this record unto the Lord. The plates thereof are of no worth because of the commandment of the Lord. For he truly saith that no one shall have them to get gain. Which is funny since Joseph Smith tried to sell the copyright for it. But the record thereof is of great worth, and whoso shall bring it to light, him will the Lord bless. For none can have power to bring it to light, save it be given of him by God. For God will that it shall be done with an eye single to his glory. Blessed be him, it used to say, or now it says he, that shall bring this thing to light, for it shall be brought out of darkness unto light. And it talks about if there's faults or the faults of man, and he that saith, show it to me, or you shall be smitten, let him beware, lest he command us. So it's reminding them why they can't see the plates, because there were a lot of people that wanted to see the plates, but he wouldn't allow it. So that's written in. More changes, more Bible verses. Then we get to the book of Ether, a lot of thereofs that are added. This is the story of the second group of people I talked about, where it's kind of like Noah, and they have a different boat. And this part was really confusing because they're in this boat that it sounds very, I imagine it to look like a Christmas ornament, but I don't think that's what it's supposed to be. Like, it's some kind of barge or something, but it sounds like they have a cork that is, pushed into a hole. And he's saying, what if we can't breathe, God? And God says, well, you take out the cork, and if water comes in, put the cork back up in. I mean, I'm paraphrasing very much right now because it would take too long to read the whole thing. But then you put it back in and you'll know that you're not able to get air right then. And I thought, well, what if they need air right then? How are they going to get the cork back up in there if water is pouring in with water pressure? And like, none of it makes sense to me. It doesn't necessarily have to, but I find it to be a very strange story. It is like the ark, but again, none of the details that the ark story has. And then he also asks God for light, and God says, well, I don't know. What do you think? Basically, like, God doesn't know what to do. And so he takes stones to God and says, touch these, and then they'll light up the place. And that also is an interesting thing to me, because then when they get to where they're going, and it says that some of them have had children, I mean, you start to think about the logistics of this barge, where it sounds like they had these stones in one room and all the people were in the same room. I don't know. I've never heard anybody talk about this in detail. So reading it, I was just trying to figure out what exactly this meant, and where are they using the bathroom? Like, how is this all working? But also, again, it shows how Joseph Smith constantly brings stones into stories. Right here, we have the other big name change, where now it says King Mosiah, but it used to say Benjamin. And of course, Benjamin had long been deceased by this point. Right here, this girl goes to her father and says, bring this guy in. I will dance for him. He'll want me for a wife. When she does that, he wants her for a wife. And she says, okay, if you'll bring me the king's head. It sounds very similar to a certain John the Baptist story. Again, poisonous serpents now biting people, again, like the other Bible story. This talks about this great calamity on the land that's worse than any calamity that's ever happened, which makes me question how that could be with the flood. Right here, that he could not be restrained because of the Spirit. Originally, it said constrained. Again, right here, constrain and restrain changed. Talks about 2 million people that died, and then there's still more people. So again, you have to think about how many people are not found. Right here is where we get the sacrament prayers that are used in the LDS Church for the water and the bread. Of course, in the Book of Mormon, it still uses wine. That was changed later to water in action, but not in here. In here, it still says wine. Right here, we have the word deserted. So, and if it so be that they perish, we know that many of our brethren have deserted over unto the Lamanites. And this is an interesting one. I double checked to make sure that I was correct with my handy dandy 1828 dictionary. But we all know deserted means to forsake, to leave utterly, to abandon, to quit with a view not to return. So by saying they deserted over to the Lamanites, we know that they went over to the Lamanites. They left to join the Lamanites. But originally it said dissented. Dissented means a difference of opinion. And so if this was correct with the word Joseph Smith originally put, then we would have known that many of their brethren had disagreed over unto the Lamanites. He used those words a few times. Right here is an important part. It's talking about how he's sealing up these records. After that, I have spoken a few words. If anyone asks you to read the Book of Mormon, they will say, do Moroni's promise. And this is Moroni's promise. And that is that if you pray after you read the Book of Mormon to ask if it's true, it says, ask God the Eternal Father in the name of Christ if these things are not true. And if ye shall ask with a sincere heart, with real intent, having faith in Christ, he will manifest the truth of it unto you by the power of the Holy Ghost. It used to say end. I think it's interesting that it uses the words if these things are not true, because I know what they're meaning by that, but it also could mean the opposite. But the things that you have to have are sincere heart, real intent, and having faith in Christ. So if you read the Book of Mormon and you prayed about it and you said, oh, my answer was no. My answer was no, that this is not true. They'd be able to say, well, your heart wasn't sincere. or you didn't have real intent, or your faith in Christ wasn't strong enough. There's always a reason why you won't feel it. And so if you're wanting to read the Book of Mormon and wanting to believe in it and you don't get that feeling, you will use that on yourself as well. You will assume that you're not being sincere enough. In the original, right after the amen, it said the end. Right here, they have it under the footnotes. I'm not sure why, but that was that. So that is all of the changes that I found. And I know I am certainly missing some, but that should give you a good idea. I hope you enjoyed that flip through and that some of you have stuck around to hear my final thoughts about this project. First, I wanted to mention one thing I did forget to talk about in the flip through, and that was that at the end of Moroni, at the almost like a couple of chapters toward the end of the book, it talks about infant baptism. And the reason I wanted to bring that up when I was doing the flip through was because that is something that was being heavily debated during the time that Joseph Smith was translating the Book of Mormon in his time period. And that is something you will see a lot throughout the whole Book of Mormon, is that there are things that are talked about that were going on in his life. And the infant baptism seems very out of place at the spot that it's in that book. And if you know that that was being debated at that exact time, and some of the circumstances in his life that were going on, then all of a sudden it makes sense. And so that was something I wanted to have talked about. It's kind of like the Native Americans being descended from Israelites. That was also something that was talked about a lot in Joseph Smith's time. And that is not just something that miraculously came out from the Book of Mormon and nobody had ever thought about it. So there are a lot of things like that in the Book of Mormon. I mentioned that I was going to talk about footnotes. At the beginning of the flip through, you saw that I had a few highlighted Bible verses that I said I started to do. And this was something that the Tanners, Sandra and Gerald Tanner, they had put out a list of Bible verses that were from the New Testament that were put into the Book of Mormon at a time that was far before the New Testament. And so at a time when it hadn't happened yet, they were quoting the New Testament. They had a list of 211 of these. They didn't even put in the ones that were in the Old Testament. Sometimes the words were just a little bit off, and sometimes they were exact. And I started to highlight those from their list because I noticed that these were ones that I did not have highlighted. So I didn't know that they were Bible verses. And when I looked at the footnotes, I realized the reason is because those footnotes did not highlight that part of the Bible. I started to do it, and then I realized very quickly that I didn't want to take the time to do all of them. It was going to take too long. And so I'd already put so much time into this project. That was not something that I needed to do, since it was from somebody else and it wasn't something I was finding on my own. I mean, I was looking at their list and then going and looking at it and finding on my own, but I didn't find it on my own originally. When I was reading the Book of Mormon at first, I would follow every single Bible footnote. And what I found very quickly is that whoever put the footnotes together, I have no idea what they were thinking, but they should not have that job. Most of the time, the footnotes would go to something that either has one word in common or a couple of words in common at best, and has nothing to do with what was in the Book of Mormon. It would be like if I wrote a book and I said I went to Target, and then I put a footnote in my book that went to someone's blog and it said I shot an arrow at a target. There were footnotes that were like that. And I got so sick of that I was like, I can't follow all of these footnotes. It's going to take too long and go nowhere. It's not showing me that this verse is in the Bible. It's not even backing up this verse. So why do they put them there? My opinion is that they put those footnotes there to make it look more meaty. When you're reading the Book of Mormon and you look down and you see multiple Bible footnotes, you believe that the Bible is going to back up what you are reading in the Book of Mormon, and it doesn't. I quickly realized that the only time I wanted to go and back up something from the Bible was when it said in the summary, if it said compared to Isaiah, whatever, then I knew that it was going to be word for word from the Bible. And I talked about that in the flip through. You saw that. And then occasionally I would be reading and it would feel like Bible language. And so I would check the footnotes and I would go and follow them. And sometimes it was a phrase from the Bible. Sometimes it wasn't. I would try to do that as much as possible. And sometimes I would look and there was not a footnote. And that was probably some of those from the list that I didn't do. And so I know I missed a lot of Bible verses that are in the Book of Mormon, but I think you still got a pretty good view of how much of the Bible is just copied and pasted into the Book of Mormon. Before the flip through, I talked mostly about just the changes because that is what this project was about. But you can't do a project like this and come out of it on the other side without a lot of thoughts about the Book of Mormon in general. And I wanted to share some of those thoughts that I had. Joseph Smith's life is very parallel to what he was writing and to the Book of Mormon in general. Like I showed in the flip through, he has his father's dream is very similar to Lehi's vision. Joseph Smith and Nephi have the exact same number of older and younger brothers. His mother, Lucy Smith, said that before the Book of Mormon was around, that Joseph Smith would, in the evening, tell them stories about the inhabitants of this country, this continent, and he would tell his family about the way they dressed, their mode of transportation, their cities, their buildings, the animals on which they rode, all of that. And so he was telling stories about the Book of Mormon people before he wrote the Book of Mormon. Feels very much like he took in his surroundings, his life, his family, his experiences, and his imagination, and then took from other sources of other books that he had access to at the time and the Bible and put them all into the story. When people say that he could not have written it, and especially in the amount of time he did, well, he didn't write it in that amount of time. He wrote it over a much longer period of time than they say that he had for it. And then also, why not? Why couldn't he have written it? Give me a good argument, because after reading the original, I know that he could have. It is much less impressive than it used to be. There are also Bible names in the Book of Mormon, and then there are some names that people say, oh, that's not from the Bible, but it's from this other historical source that he wouldn't have had access to, like the Apocrypha. The name Nephi is in the Apocrypha, but he did have an Apocrypha. And he also had a Bible that had a list of alphabetical names. He also, by a lot of accounts, was very interested in Captain Kidd and the Captain Kidd stories. And in Captain Kidd, he goes to this island of Cumorah. If I'm remembering correctly, there's a city of Moroni there. And Cumorah was spelled C-A. And in the Book of Mormon, it is spelled C-U. And I've had people say their argument of having the name Cumorah be in both things is that it's spelled differently, so it's not the same thing. In the original Book of Mormon, I forgot to show this in the flip through, it was spelled C-A, just like Captain Kidd's Cumorah. They have changed that to C-U. My main takeaway is there are a lot of changes. I know without a doubt after reading this, after this project, that he could 100% have written this book. It's not as impressive as we are made to believe it is. And I think sometimes when people talk about how impressive it is, they're not readers. Because if you read a lot, you quickly see the range of talent in books, and he's not anywhere near the top. The Book of Mormon isn't anywhere near the top. I believe it is plagiarism of the Bible. There are quite a few other books that I believe he plagiarized ideas from as well. And now I know how many changes there actually are. And I understand that he could have written this. So I hope this has helped anyone who has also been questioning this. I know this has been an extremely long video, and I really appreciate all of you who have stuck around for this whole time.